Once again, Lyra was finding herself disoriented in the mornings. Waking up in a new place did that. At least this would be the last time she had to move. Those results would come soon, and then she'd be able to settle down. She dragged herself out of bed and walked down the hall, past her mum's studio, and to the bathroom across from Chloe's room. In the past 9 days, she'd managed to learn her way around. The first thing she noticed when she looked in the mirror was that her hair was a total mess. She found her hairbrush sitting on the edge of the sink and started straightening it out. She really took more pride in her appearance now than when she had been a pony. True, she still looked somewhat like her pony self, but it was just her hair and eye colour. Those things didn't really matter. The brush snagged on a tangle of green hair, and she pulled it through. She rubbed her eyes and blinked at her reflection sleepily.
How would I look with dark hair? More like a regular human? That'd be good.
She looked down at her fingers. A few rough patches were forming at the tips from guitar playing.
It was painful at first, but I was told they were good. It would make it easier to pick the strings. What did Randall call them? Calluses? I think that was it.
It was mostly on her right hand, but there were a few forming on her left as well. She poked at them, curious about the odd stiff texture. She winced as her brush got caught in her hair again, and then went back to looking at her hands. She stopped. Both her hands were empty, but she was still brushing her hair. She looked up in the mirror again, and had just caught a glimpse of a fading aura around the brush, before it dropped and clattered on the floor. In a panic, she knelt down to pick it up, but her fingers were gone. 2 mint green hooves were sticking out of her sleeves in their place.
Lyra sat straight up in bed. It was still dark outside and completely quiet, except for the crickets chirping. She turned to look at the clock on the nightstand. The numbers 2:43 a.m. were glowing on it. Just the numbers. Her parents had called it digital. She pulled her hands up to check that they were still there. Everything seemed to be in order. Then she reached up to check her forehead, just to make sure it was still smooth.
Do I really expect to find my horn again? Of course not. Humans don't have those. But I better make sure I really am still normal.
As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she scanned the room. There was the dresser, and that large shape leaning against the corner was her guitar. She could barely make out the indistinct shape of her lyre in the shadows. It was set up on top of the dresser, probably about 10 feet away from her. She tried to remember how this worked, focusing her mental power, letting it flow into the object, and picking it up. Nothing happened.
It was just a dream, still no magic. It was crazy to think that I would.
Even though it had turned out to be nothing, that feeling when she'd realized she was using magic again, the first thing that had flashed through her mind had been how she would explain that to her family. For the past couple days, she'd just kept on telling them that she had somehow lost her memory.
I'm starting to feel like a broken record, but what else can I say? Especially after what happened with Audrey. But how long can I really go on lying to my own family?
She laid her head back on the pillow and pulled the covers up.
Everything's gonna work out. Somehow.
One thing that hadn't changed since being a pony, Lyra still slept in late. On most days, at least. This morning she was up unusually early, but after that dream she hadn't exactly been able to rest easy. Lyra slowly worked through her daily routine. Nothing was out of the ordinary. No magic, no hooves. That much was good. It had been over a week, and Lyra was starting to get used to how things worked with her family. They had their own routines. At times she felt that she was throwing them off by suddenly showing up, but her parents seemed happy that she was back. Most of the time, at least. There still seemed to be a trace of doubt every once in a while, but that would soon be cleared up. The door to Chloe's room was still shut. She was probably still asleep. Lyra was still getting used to the idea that she had a younger sister. For the past 7 years, she'd had a sister. A human one. Chloe seemed to be adjusting to Lyra being around all the time, but she didn't really like to talk to her. And she didn't know who Lyra was yet. If those results came back and it turned out Lyra was who she thought she was, and Lyra just knew they would, then they'd tell her, but only then. For now, Lyra was just staying at our house for a little while.
Chloe's almost the same age as the Cutie Mark Crusaders. I was great at getting along with them, but for human kids, what do? They definitely weren't concerned with getting a cutie mark or anything like that. I don't really know much about the kind of unicorns Chloe has interest in.
Her parents' room was down the hall. Her mother was most likely asleep as well. She would probably wake up soon, sit on the back porch and eat breakfast, and then work on painting. There was a half-finished work in the studio that Lyra could see as she walked past. It looked like it would be a human figure with wings, but that was about as ridiculous as a human who could use magic. Lyra stopped in her bedroom again to pick up the paperback sitting on her nightstand. A bookmark stuck out about 3/4 of the way through. She picked it up and took it with her. Nobody else was down here yet. Her dad was probably awake. He would get up earlier than anybody else and work on writing. Well, he called it writing, but it was actually all on the computer and not on paper. Humans did use those for just about everything. Maybe Lyra would learn how to use one herself someday. Typing looked like it was fun. She set the book down at the kitchen table and walked over to the cupboard. She opened it up, but it was the wrong one. This one was filled with plates. She moved on to the next one, and the one after that. She still couldn't keep track of what was where. Here it was.
Now, where were those things? Those thin pastries with the fruit filling that came in the shiny foil wrappers.
She searched the shelves and found the blue box that came in. It was up high. Maybe she was still half asleep because her first instinct was to levitate it down. She shook herself and reached up, closing her fingers around it. She stood there for a while, staring at it blankly.
Good morning, Lyra.
Oh, good morning.
You're up early. Is everything all right?
Yeah, of course. I just had a weird dream last night. It's still kinda getting to me.
Do you remember what it was?
No, I'm already forgetting why it had me so bothered in the first place. I used to have dreams all the time.
How long ago?
It was, I don't know, I just used to have them.
He started making coffee. It had a machine that did it automatically. From what she'd seen, humans were practically addicted to the stuff, and her parents were no exception. Lyra sat down at the table and crossed her legs, leaning back in the chair. She tore open the foil, took out one of the pastries, and took a small bite from the corner. You could heat these things up in something called a toaster, but she didn't feel like it today. It still tasted good, if a bit stale. Bonbon would probably be horrified, but prepackaged food was a major part of the human diet. A few minutes later, her father sat down across the table from her with his coffee.
Dad?
Yes?
I've been reading your book. There's a few things that confuse me, though.
What do you mean?
Well, magic for one thing. How do they use it? You say they can just learn it, but anybody can do that?
It takes some complex mental focus and years of practice, but essentially any character could learn it. Of course, the Citadel doesn't let anyone in. They want to protect their power and teach it only to those they decide are worthy. You've read about that part, haven't you?
I guess I never thought magic worked like that.
That's the thing about magic. It's not very well defined, so writers can do whatever we want with it.
That's not right. The exact nature of magic wasn't easy to get, even if you could use it. But there's some basics that were just undeniable. For one thing, in order to have control over it, you would need a horn to focus it through. And it was a lot easier to learn than he claimed it was. Partly because a unicorn was designed to be able to use it. Oh, and, unicorns.
He stared at her.
Do you have any of them in this book? I know Chloe likes them, but, you know.
I don't have many mythical creatures in my world, no. Just regular horses.
Mythical creatures? Like all of my friends and family up until over a month ago. And horseback riding was mentioned every so often in the book. It's like they're just animals. It's hard to explain exactly how I feel about that. The horses aren't much like ponies except in appearance. A lot of the things in the story seem like the humans I read about. I didn't read anything about humans riding horses, but if the princess had wanted to erase records of humans, that would be one of the first things to go, along with warfare. There's a lot about that in my dad's story too. It's an interesting story. I definitely haven't read anything quite like it before.
And I've got critics who claim it's too cliché.
Is this kind of story normal for human? Is it a common theme for stories?
It's a very wide genre, but some things never change.
It's all somewhat based on history, though, isn't it? You just added things to it, like magic in the countries.
She waited for his response because she realized that the Kingdom of Amathia and the nation of America sounded equally unfamiliar in her mind. For all she knew, it could be a real place.
There are some Greek influences. That sets it apart from...
Greek? You mean like those old stories and songs they play on Lyra? I know I've heard some things about that.
Half of our family, my half that is, comes from Greece. That's where the Mekellikos name comes from. My grandfather lived there, but I've only visited the country twice in my life.
That's amazing! Greece is one of the countries that had really fascinates me ever since seeing a couple pages in Twilight's book. Not only had they invented the lyre, which was a very popular instrument in Equestria, but I'm one of them!
You're interested in your heritage like I am, I take it?
Just recently, to be honest. I used to...
What?
Nothing. I forgot what I was going to say.
Lyra, the doctor told me that it looked like nothing was wrong with you.
Why would there be? I'm normal.
When we lost you all those years ago, your mother and I didn't hear anything. Everything was gone, but there was no sign of a break-in. All the doors were still locked. You had just vanished into thin air, and now you've reappeared just as suddenly, and you say you don't remember anything.
I really don't. You have to believe me. You do believe me, right?
If there's anything you don't want to talk about...
I don't remember anything. I'm sorry. I wish I could make up a convincing lie. But how much about the human world do I really know? I know about Des Moines. I kind of saw Chicago.
She thought back to the list of towns she'd copied into her journal at the airport, but she didn't know what any of them were like.
Anything would be better than saying nothing. I need some fresh air. I think I'll take a walk.
Before her father could say anything, Lyra stood up, slipped her shoes on, and headed out the door.
I don't plan to stay out for long. I just need a walk. It's nice and quiet out here in the woods. It's away from all the cars, so the smell isn't quite as noticeable. In fact, it's almost like being in Whitetail Woods. I participated in the running of the leaves a few times there, back when I was a pony. I almost let myself slip up! It was just the little thing, sure, but I can't mention that I always liked reading because that came from spending so much time in the Canada Library as a filly with my other father. And the reason I'm just now interested in my heritage, because I always thought I was just a half-unicorn mix with weakened magic as a result. But now it turned out that I'm a descendant of an ancient race of humans. I can't say a single word about myself to my family, and it's getting impossible. Maybe I don't feel like I'm at home here. Lying definitely makes things difficult, but I'm not sure if I'm really missing Equestria or if I'm missing that feeling of performing on stage with Randall in Des Moines. And yet, I still don't want to give up a chance to live with my human family for anything.
She walked along the side of the road since there wasn't a sidewalk out here. One time a human went past on the other side, sitting in some kind of weird machine that ran on two skinny wheels. Lyra stopped in her tracks and watched. It seemed like they were moving forward by pumping their legs, and they were going so much faster on that machine than they would just walking. Humans really did never cease to amaze her. She paid careful attention to the street signs and the houses that she passed. She didn't plan on going far, but the last thing she needed was to get lost. The trees thinned out eventually, giving way to a neighborhood where the houses were closer together. It really didn't seem like she'd come that far from Des Moines. This place was so similar.
This is my hometown. I was born here. Does it feel like home, though? My parents might have their doubts about me, but I'm certain I'm right. I have to be.
For a while, she just moved on, lost in thought, until she eventually came to what must be the downtown area. A few small shops were here. It was nothing like the big city. These buildings were scarcely any bigger than houses. Actually, Lyra realized her own house was bigger than a lot of these. There was a metal stand fixed to a sidewalk, and another one of those two-wheel devices chained to it. Lyra stopped for a closer look. She knelt down, pushing a pedal slightly with one hand. It clicked as it spun around. When she pushed the other way, it gave some resistance, and yes, the wheel moved. She had to learn how this worked. Another human walked past. He looked at her strangely, and she stood up quickly and moved on. Looking around, it seemed like there were some restaurants here. Pizza, Chinese, Mexican. Those were all countries, she was pretty sure. One darkened shop had a for rent sign, and the otherwise empty window. But then she came to one that really seemed interesting. Bell-filled used books. A bell rang as she opened the door. She had a sudden flashback to that store that she'd walked into in Des Moines, just hours after arriving in the human world. But this time she could afford to look around, and she wasn't nervous about talking to that human behind the register at all. It was a female, older than her, but still fairly young. She seemed lost in the book, even though there was something in front of her on the counter that might have been a computer. A glowing picture of an apple was on the side facing Lyra.
I was looking for a book on human history.
Any specific period?
All of it.
Well, over there is nonfiction. Are you looking for American history? Or I guess you'd be looking for world history, right?
Actually, I know about some other countries, but not much about America. You have books about that?
Of course. Are you from overseas? You don't seem to have an accent, but...
I'm from America. I'm just now starting to research history. I need a good overview.
Right. You didn't learn it in school?
My school was different.
I'll see what I can help you find. It looks like it'll be a slow day anyway.
My name's Lyra. I'm kinda new in town.
Monica. Wait. That hair. You really exist!
What? Of course I do. What do you mean?
I was talking to a friend of mine. He said he'd met some girl with green hair on a plane who claimed she was Thomas Michelako's long-lost daughter. And I kind of doubt there are that many green-haired Lyras in this city.
You know Paul?
Well, he comes in here every so often. Small world, isn't it?
I don't think so.
So you're staying with Mr. Michelakos now? I've met him a few times. He comes here every once in a while. I know he has a younger daughter, but I've never heard of you. Figures that's why you'd be his long-lost daughter.
Yeah, his books are pretty popular, aren't they?
You could say that.
Lyra looked at all the shelves lined up to the back wall. They were divided into sections: fiction, history, and travel. She didn't even know where to start, and it was hard to ask her questions straight out without getting weird looks and more questions in return.
Anyways, you said you wanted American history?
Right.
Well, this is what we've got. Feel free to...
Lyra had already pulled out a volume that had caught her eye, and was flipping through it, looking at the occasional diagrams and illustrations.
take a look around.
Quick question. This is going to sound odd, but it's the year 2014 now, isn't it?
It has been for a while, yes.
And America was founded in the year 1776? This country isn't very old.
You really don't know anything, do you? I'm starting to see why Paul found you so interesting.
I think this one looks good. I'll take it.
Great. Glad I could help.
Oh, and, unicorns.
What was that?
Well, it's my sister. She loves unicorns. Do you have any books on those?
You mean like children's books?
Whatever you have.
If unicorns really were just stories for kids, well, that's just what they would be in this world. It didn't really matter. Lyra hadn't really considered it until she started running her mouth off to Audrey, but humans did know something about unicorns. It was odd, really, how they knew about unicorns despite there being none around. Then again, Equestria had been similar. Everything had felt so backwards ever since she'd come home, but now she'd started getting some answers.
I'll see what I can find for you.
Lyra followed her to a section of shelves labeled Fantasy. They both scanned the titles printed on the colorful spines.
There's one of Dad's.
Yep. What was it like, finding out who you were? Have you heard of his books before?
No, I can't say I had. I'm reading them now, though.
I see.
Monica crouched down to look at one of the lower shelves, then pulled out a book. She looked at it for a moment, then stooped up and handed it to Lyra.
I think this is the best I can do.
Lyra stared down at the cover of the book. A plain white unicorn. A blank flank, even though he, or she, it was hard to tell, was an adult, standing in the forest, drinking straight from a river. That was just disgusting, completely uncivilized. She raised an eyebrow.
So, is this a novel?
Yeah, it's a pretty popular one. There's a movie of it too, but I'm not sure if we have that in stock.
You mean like what they show on TV? I think I'll just read this. I mean, I like the idea of movies. It's like getting to watch a play whenever you want. I just can't stare at a box like that for very long.
Really now? You're a dying breed. Seems like people don't read as much as they should these days.
This is the best you have about unicorns, though? I was thinking something more informative, factual.
I don't know, you could check the mythology section. I doubt anyone's written a field guide, though.
Right, because unicorns aren't real, and magic's completely made up.
Yeah. So, will that be all? I can check you out over at the front.
This should be enough for now. Thanks for helping me find these.
It's no problem. That's an interesting selection of topics there, though.
I guess you could say I have a wide range of interests. I've always read a lot.
It's a good habit to be in. Besides, it keeps this place in business. And your dad, for that matter. Say hi to him for me.
Yeah, I'll do that.
I know this isn't exactly my place to pry, but I can tell. There's something bothering you, isn't there? Something important on your mind, and you don't want to talk to anyone about it.
What? No, there's not. I'm not hiding anything. Why would I be?
And there you go. That's exactly what I'm talking about. You're acting so strange. I'm not going to ask you what it is, but if it's really that important, you won't be able to cover it up forever.
I don't have a choice.
Trust me, sooner or later, you'll need to get it off your chest. You'll feel better. That's all I'm saying, just some free advice.
Thanks, I guess.
It's no problem. So, will I see you again?
Probably.
It was nice meeting you, Lyra.
Yeah, same here.
Lyra found her way back through the neighborhood to her house easy enough. She only got lost once. It hadn't been much longer than an hour or two since she'd walked out. Maybe she should apologize. Her dad was probably worried. There was still some part of her that didn't like that she was still considered a child. She'd paid her own rent, well, half of it, for several years. But maybe it was best to live with her parents. It wasn't like she could fend for herself in this world. She needed to start learning about it. She thought about what Monica had said.
Do my parents notice I'm acting strange? If Monica had, then yes, they probably had too, but I can't exactly just tell the truth.
She walked past the mailbox right by the side of the road and down the long driveway towards the house, past both of her family's cars. One was the big red one she'd come back from the airport in. The other was a smaller black one. Her hand closed around the doorknob and pushed it open. With an uneasy smile on her face, trying to give the impression nothing had gone wrong, she walked into the kitchen. Both of her parents were sitting there together. A stack of letters was on the kitchen table. They were reading one of them, a sheet of paper that had been folded a few times. There was something on their faces.
I'm back.
Lyra?
Is there something wrong?
Without another word, her mother stood up and wrapped her in a tight embrace. Lyra noticed there were tears on her cheeks.